Auspicious greeting, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to our Future and Hope Public Lecture Series, organized by Foguangshan Buddhist Temple, Boston, and BLIA Boston Chapter. My name is Louis Lau, and I'm the MC of today. On behalf of BLIA Boston Chapter, I would like to welcome our speaker, Ina Denton. We are delighted and it is our honor to host you today. Ina is a practicing Buddhist, having taken refuge in the Triple Gems and the 5 Precepts in November 2009. She is a certified lay Dharma lecturer and vice chairperson of the International Outreach Committee for BLIA, and also a member of Guangming Buddhist Temple in Orlando, Florida. Ina holds a Master of Social Work degree from the University of Illinois. Her professional career includes public and private human service administration, board and program development, community partnership, and executive consultation. Now I would like to invite BLIA Boston Chapter President Claude Liang to give us an opening remark. Please, Claude Liang.
Thank you, Louis. Once again, auspicious greeting to Ina, Venerable Jieqian, BLIA members and friends. And for those who have been following us, welcome back. So today we are very happy and honored again to have Ina to give us a talk to present the topic. I'll let Ina introduce the topic to you all herself. But I'm very glad that everyone are still coming back tonight, even though during this pandemic, so that we can continue to cultivate our Buddha again. So without further delaying, let's go back to MC Louis, then so that we can continue our talk tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, President Claude Liang. The Dharma talk will last approximately 1 hour. I'd like to encourage you to ask questions by typing it in either the Q&A area in Zoom, which is here, or the chat box in YouTube, which is here. So at the end of the talk, before the Q&A section, we'll also listen to an English chanting of Sutra, which lasts about 10 minutes. The melody is reminiscent of American folk songs. It is greatly appreciated by English speakers who are unfamiliar with Chinese chanting cadence. Please please join me in welcoming Ina, who is going to speak to us on 8 realization of a Bodhisattva Sutra, a guide for our practice. Please, Ms. Denton.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Venerable Juyan, whom I understand is still in another meeting, to President Liang, Louis, and Z, who helped get us all organized for this evening. And thank you to Boston Temple for inviting me this evening. And to all of you who have joined, my heartfelt greetings and appreciation for Zooming or YouTubing in this evening. Also a shout out, as we say, to my home temple for the last 11 years, and to Venerable Chifan, who's now in Toronto, who gave my husband and me the opportunity to learn, teach, and become part of our little Sangha. 2 white-haired seniors enriched our lives under the canopy of our Bodhi tree, Guangming Temple in Orlando, Florida. You see pictures of the temple there. As a BLIA lay Dharma lecturer, I've had the privilege to share the Dharma and Dharma teaching approaches throughout North America and during my Taiwan stays. Now, a caveat, please note that I am not a Buddhist scholar. I'm a retired social worker, family and individual counselor, program developer, and consultant to medical associations and human service boards and executives. I've come to Buddhism in the latter part of my life with the mind of an explorer of thought and hopefully a server of my fellow human beings. Therefore, if you have uber knowledge of the Dharma and its meaning, please do not take offense if my views are a bit off the mark to your way of thinking. When Venerable Juchan asked me to give a talk, I thought about our current situation. A rampant coronavirus, greater social awareness of racial and cultural inequities, and the stress of managing family and work, some people no longer having a job, missing loved ones, and trying very, very hard to stay healthy and safe. And I thought about how the Buddha taught us about worry and longing, about how we are our own worst enemies, not able to grasp the sources of our discomfort, our confusion, discontent, our suffering. Last month, Dr. Quan Chan gave us a 10-point plan right here for self-care during the coronavirus pandemic. Now that we have hopefully heeded his advice, we can move with greater determination toward compassion and loving kindness into our larger community. There's a reason why I chose this sutra. I chose the 8 Realizations of Bodhisattva Sutra, which is also referred to as the Realizations of Great Being Sutra, one and the same. Our Buddha book buddies, the name of our book study groups here, earlier this year read the book by Venerable Master, The Great Realizations. It is my inspiration for today as we look at its application in a tumultuous world. I hope we can use the wisdom within it as our guide. Our goals for this evening might be a bit ambitious, but let's proceed. A bit about the history of the 8 Realizations of a Bodhisattva Sutra. It is not the recounting of a specific teaching at a specific place and time. In fact, this sutra is probably like the Dhammapada or the 52 Chapter Sutra and others, a compilation of his wisdom. The sutra was brought to China approximately 2,000 years ago. The intended audience was thought to be educated, intellectual non-Buddhists as well as Buddhists. The sutra gets right down to business, explaining how the world works, why we continue our tortuous lives, and what we must understand to achieve a freedom that allows us to fulfill our role of relieving others' suffering as well as our own. And the 8 Realizations Sutra is short, it's concise, it is a daily reminder of what we must always hold in our mind. It, as the sutra says, should wrap around our day from when we wake up to when we turn out the lights, should be as routine as brushing our teeth. It begins, for all disciples of the Buddha, each morning and night, recite with a sincere mind these 8 realizations of a Bodhisattva. Before delving into the sutra, let's take a moment to describe Bodhisattva, since it might be a new term for some who are joining us this evening. People new to our temples often hear the word chanted, also casually uttered. They hear us refer to Guanyin and Cittagarbha as bodhisattvas, but then they hear us call one another bodhisattva. When they find the courage, they shyly ask, who is this bodhisattva? And they get further confused when we call ourselves and others Buddha, but we'll leave that to another talk, another time. Bodhisattva is Sanskrit, made up of 2 words, sattva, a sentient being, and bodhi, truth and wisdom. The definition, therefore, is an enlightened being. But it is also a bodhisattva in training, meaning that if we are on the path toward enlightenment, if we are following the steps of the Noble Eightfold Path, but we are not yet fully there, then we too are bodhisattva. A bodhisattva performs more than the random act of kindness on a be good to your neighbor day. A bodhisattva's inner world, the mind, is always seeking ways to help others. It should be our first nature, not second, always the utmost intent of our every thought and action. The supreme traits, which we call perfections, or in Sanskrit, paramitas, are always in the mind and therefore guide the actions of a bodhisattva. There are 6. Giving, which is unselfish sharing, giving what true wisdom tells us is needed. and morality, ridding ourselves of thought and actions that are hurtful to ourselves and others. Patience means that we contemplate, observe. We aren't in such a hurry. We act out of knowledge, not emotion. And diligence. We increase our skill. We don't run away from the hard stuff. We persevere. We stay the course. Meditative concentration, often now called mindfulness, means that we look inward, observe and cultivate our mind according to the Buddhist teaching. Wisdom means that we develop a wisdom beyond that of worldly life experience, a wisdom that comes from a deep understanding of the Dharma, which incidentally allows us to properly practice the other 5 perfections on the list. So let's talk about sutra study. Since there are so many books and articles and periodicals about Buddhism, why study a sutra? Why delve into it, dissect it, pick it apart, and put it back together? To my way of thinking, a sutra is a way to see the working of the Buddha's mind. It's not simply a memory activity. It's not an ancient history course. It's not only a ritual. Rather, it is a teaching that is to be brought forward into our daily lives, stripped of archaic language, restated in a manner that makes sense in the century and society in which we live. Some religions are reduced to mantras, poems, euphemistic phrases that make us feel good. However, a religious, moral, insightful teaching should be the jumping off point for our personal development and consequent action. The tenets of a belief should make us uncomfortable, introspective, challenge us to realize the better angels of our nature, or what we as Buddhists would call simply our Buddha nature. Buddhist leaders are always reminding us to take the Buddhist message to heart and put it in action today. Use the teachings to bring peace to others. Venerable Master Xingyun, founder of Foguanshan Monastery, says it succinctly: only by being able to see things from another's point of view can there be harmony between oneself and others. Sutra study helps us achieve that. The sutras speak of compassion. Venerable Master says that Humanistic Buddhism, the original intent of 50 plus years of Buddha's teaching, is simple. Understand the basic truths, cultivate your mind, be a moral, ethical person, serve others. That's it. In his book, Humanistic Buddhism, A Blueprint for Life, he reminds us that, quote, the most important human relations between oneself and others are mutual respect, forgiveness, understanding, and assistance. Only by putting oneself in another's shoes and by treating others as you would have them treat you can human relations achieve harmony. Only by being able to see things from another's point of view can there be harmony between oneself and others, he says. Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, when discussing the 8 Realizations Sutra, admonishes we who are practitioners and teachers. And this is his quote: if we teach Buddhist philosophy through lectures, but do not practice generosity to ease the suffering of others, we have not yet attained the essence of Buddhism. He's really saying realize, then actualize. The 8 Realizations Sutra is composed of 8 statements, things we must comprehend, appreciate, realize, hence the title. There are 2 parts to the sutra. Realization number 1 is the premise on which everything else follows. It sets forth the reality of our world as impermanent and ever-changing, and that we create the turmoil in the world and in ourselves. And then the rest, realizations 2 through 8, are statements of what causes us to get into our predicament, how to get out of it, and why we should. The realizations, if deeply understood by us, will cause us to learn, think, and act in ways that are inner contemplative and outer focused, always aware of thought patterns and needs of others, and always in our wisdom, finding a way to meet those needs. We are experiencing some difficult times now. What we often call the disease, the coronavirus or COVID-19, and the dis-ease of racial prejudice and resultant civic unrest. So let's go to the first realization. It says, realize that this world is impermanent and that nations are dangerous and fragile. The four great elements lead to suffering and are empty of the five aggregates, are without a self. All things arise, cease, change, and become different. They are illusory. The mind is the source of unwholesomeness, and the body is the gathering of wrongdoings. If we understand this, we can turn away from the cycle of birth and death. You will notice in the slides for the realizations, there are some areas in red, and those are the areas that we're going to focus on this evening. The first realization sets forth the status of the world and human beings. Everything is impermanent. Things are that for the moment and will change, evolve, whether it's a tree, a flower, the table where I'm sitting, even ourselves. From moment to moment, we change. And our political systems too are, as the realization states, fragile. We are experiencing this in our country at this time. Not just stuff changes, so do our thoughts, our conceptualizations. This should remind us that as we experience the world, as we become more engaged with people and the planet, if we are wise and caring, our mind too can mature if we study and then diligently apply the Dharma to our daily experiences. However, often our unwillingness to accept change, to grow in our understanding, cause great disillusionment and negative mental states, what we call suffering. We suffer because we want to hold on, or we want to discard or rewrite the past. We want to seek pleasure or what we think is pleasure, always grasping, wanting more or less. We want a way out of this misery, but are bound by our thoughts, our bodies, our desires, and how we view life through our self-created fog. The Buddha teaches us the three Dharma seals. The Dharma, all of his teaching. The seals, things that are authentic, things that are true, irrefutable, stand the test of time. Think of the gold seal on a diploma, an embossed emblem asserting authenticity. So the three seals are impermanence. Nothing is static. Everything is always in the state of change, building up and breaking down, even us, which leads us to no self. We are made up of the elements and perceptions that are constructs of our mind. Mine different than yours from your friend and your foe, and that we change with time, with experience, and hopefully with wisdom, with connectedness, and see our oneness, which leads us to nirvana. This third seal tells that if we understand numbers 1 and 2, we will leave a sea of suffering, no longer yearning for permanence in ourselves and in the world. In essence, the first realization is a way of stating the first two of the Four Noble Truths. The Buddha saves the fourth truth, the how-to, until later. We are discontented, disillusioned by life. We suffer, and we create it. But we can end it. The third truth tells us that if we can understand the impermanence and ever-changing of our current substance, our flesh and bones, our thoughts and actions, then we can get beyond that cycle of birth and death, samsara, my last Sanskrit word for the day. And here's how I envision samsara. I think of it as a hamster wheel of existence. We go around and around, unable to attain this inner peace because we keep making some of the same mistakes over and over and over and over again. A short word about turning away from the cycle of birth and death. This can be confusing to many. This does not necessarily mean that we no longer are born, live a mortal life, then pass away. In fact, many bodhisattvas return to an earthly existence time after time to bring peace and joy to others. That said, it's all I'm going to say about the cycle, other than to say it's a choice. And perhaps we delve into the remaining 7 realizations, we will find a way to hop off the wheel, become less hamster, and a little more Buddha. So what does the first realization mean to our current experience? COVID-19. Yes, we will all die someday. This body will not last forever. However, by not accepting science, by putting self-interest before others, through blame, dishonest proclamations, and wishful thinking, many people are needlessly dying. Many sought to blame China or deny their vulnerability. Won't touch me, my community, my class, my race. A bodhisattva listens carefully to what is needed and then attempts to fill that need. Fo Guangshan has met the needs for masks and medical supplies throughout the United States and Canada. Think of the lives we might have saved just by our donating simple pieces of cloth like a mask. And mine has pink flamingos on it because I'm in Florida. Racial unrest. For many in our society, the American dream is truly an illusion. The mind and body are the source of unwholesomeness and wrongdoings, says the Sutra. By our valuing some above others, by the inequity of opportunity and thinking that some are better, smarter, more worthy, the powerful have had their knee on the neck of many, and those who have been grievously harmed are fighting for their humanity. The first realization says we create our messes. We put people at health risk. We put people at economic risk. By indulging in duality thinking and judgment, we contribute to the pain of others. And the following realizations clearly tell us where we need to focus our efforts to get beyond the quicksand in which we often find ourselves. The second realization talks about desire, that more desire causes more suffering. If we lessen the desire, we will be at ease. Basically, what this means is that it's never enough. We get our first car, perhaps a used Ford Fiesta, and we dream of the Mustang on the showroom floor. We think that stuff will make us happy. Or the loss, perhaps losing the car in an accident, will create despair. We need to learn that peace and contentment comes from what is in our mind, not in our garage. So we must let go of old beliefs of permanence, separateness, and omnipotence, all of which cause a heap of disappointment, disillusionment, and lots of dollars at the cosmetic counter. Accept what is, and then work to make the world a better place. Acceptance. Acceptance is not resignation. Rather, it is seeing reality and seeing where one's efforts must be directed to effect change for the betterment of our society, the people, and the earth upon which we all depend. So that we realize how the world works and how we should work in the world, I encourage you to read the Venerable Master's book, The 8 Realizations, the Great Realizations. Think of the deep meanings of the actual and metaphorical stories therein. The woman mourning her son, the monk carrying a woman across the river, etc. Find current illustrations for these stories that have been passed down for centuries. You will learn so much about the Sutra, the Buddha, the Venerable Master, and yourself. Our desires cause us a level of self-centeredness that inhibits the Bodhisattva practice of morality. We must therefore ask ourselves, What is the moral thing to do to be medically safe and keep others safe from us? And how can we fight for racial justice? Can we work in the community? Can we simply, by a smile and a kind word, convey our respect and dignity to others? How can we, as the Venerable Master urges us, create that harmony he speaks about? And when it comes to moving away from our greed and self-centeredness, we go on to the third realization. The third realization says that a Bodhisattva is peaceful in poverty. A word about poverty. Being creatures of a monetary and commodities world, we think we need a fat bank account and a full closet. A Purdue University research study a few years ago found that $105,000 to be the ideal income for life satisfaction for a North American family. That earnings past that point tended to coincide with lower levels of happiness and well-being. I guess that's when competition, jealousy, and greed really kick in. Peaceful in poverty does not mean lack of food, shelter, and health care. How can parents be peaceful when they hear their children's hungry cries? Racial discrimination and the concomitant lack of opportunity to earn a living is not peaceful in poverty. Having lost one's job and having to wait in long lines at a food distribution center is not peace. Peaceful in poverty does not mean reusing masks and gowns that put other patients and fellow healthcare workers at work. Can we do with less? Of course. That is the meaning of peaceful in poverty. Have what we need, share the rest. Will we work for racial justice, feed and clothe those in need? Can we be more moral, more bodhisattva? We will if we study the way of compassion and loving kindness as taught by the Buddha. I want to share with you a beautiful poem. The Joy of Dharma. Being born with me and being fed my entire life, even my body cannot be taken away with me. Therefore, relatives and possessions, as many as there are bright stars in the sky, will certainly be left behind as well when I leave by myself. The exalted, magnificent, and well-adorned houses are unstable and will finally fall apart, leaving only remains. If we carefully ponder this phenomenon, our desire for pleasant objects will easily quench. People of my father's and forefathers' generations have continuously striven their entire lives, but all have failed. Had I exerted myself like them, I would also have no success. Therefore, isn't it joyful to use this life to practice the profound, sublime Dharma? This poem was written by a Tibetan monk. He did not pen it while living in a beautifully adorned monastery. In fact, he remained in China teaching, also traveled to India and the West. For a period, he tended goats in the mountain while teaching those he was permitted to teach. He knew the relative importance of possessions and that you can't take it with you. He knew that the greatest possession, as he says at the end of the poem, is the profound, sublime Dharma. So now the fourth realization. It tells us that laziness leads to downfall. Okay, I have a confession as a COVID hermit. I haven't been lying on the sofa like this guy, drinking beer and eating pizza, but I have had some unproductive days in the past 8 months. Moping around, missing my friends, missing my husband, missing my dog, missing travel. We talked about travel when we were setting up today, missing routine, especially missing trips to libraries and coffee shops and our temple tea house, where the white noise hum of people and espresso machines actually help me concentrate. My Mara, my devil, my negative thinking was my wish for what was, my difficulty with what is, and my loss of focus on what I can and should be doing. Think about how easy it is to fall into clinging. Sounds like an oxymoron, fall, clinging, but it's what we do. We can easily relapse into putting self and erroneous perceptions into play, forgetting the truths of impermanence, non-self, and nirvana, and our responsibility for others, which leads us to the fifth realization. A bodhisattva is always mindful, studies widely, listens more, increases his wisdom. Here I want to direct your attention to the phrase studies widely. We have a responsibility to be serious about this. The Venerable Master, in his Life's 100 Tasks, lists as number 1, quote, read from at least one newspaper and one good book each day, end quote. I guess the iPad these days can count too. He encourages us to expand our universe of knowledge, engage in many aspects of life, literature, politics, the arts. He doesn't say just read his books. He encourages us to be engaged in the world, read Buddhist teachings, other religious teachings, secular books, and so on. Given our current social unrest, it is time to, as the Venerable Master reminded us, walk in other shoes. So here's some reading suggestions for you. They're suggestions only, but I gotta tell you, if you were in one of my classes, it might be required reading. The first book, America for Americans, is about the history of anti-immigrant sentiment in America. The author, Erica Lee, is the granddaughter of Chinese immigrants. Okubo's book, Citizen 13660, that's probably 13,660. I imagine that was her number. Through illustrations and prose, chronicles her experiences as an American-born woman of Japanese ancestry in World War II in an internment camp. She said, quote, in the camps, I had the opportunity to study the human race from cradle to grave and to see what happens to people when reduced to one status and one condition. Caste is the latest book of journalist and author Isabel Wilkerson, who explains the effect of racism on our country. We should read widely if we are to understand current events and thereby be good Bodhisattva practitioners. But we white people shouldn't overlook writings from our race either. And that's the next slide. Yes. In the last Buddha Dharma journal, this is what they look like. Get them. I came across a 2-page letter that begins, Dear white people, including myself, written by a Zen Buddhist chaplain residing in New York. She lovingly but very clearly holds our white feet to the fire. She talks about how we remain in our comfy bubbles, constructing walls, even in our temple. Here's a quote. Many or most of us come to the Dharma through suffering and a desire to end suffering. But as soon as we start to feel a sense of ease from our own pain, we start building a wall, creating a safe bubble. She goes on to say, practice is not meant to be comfortable. As we practice, we have to keep pushing our edges. Our bubbles not only keep people out, they actively prevent our own practice from growing and deepening. Our bubbles prevent us from living our bodhisattva vows. This nun from Japanese tradition is saying the same thing we heard from a Tibetan poet, a Vietnamese monk, and our Chinese Venerable Master. Universal truths. So let's go to realization number 6. The poor and suffering have more resentment. Let's think about that. Have any of us been out of work, months behind in our rent, homeless and hungry, knowing our kids are falling behind when homeschooling because we can't afford a computer? How do we feel? I bet we'd be pretty frightened, sad, angry, and we might find ourselves stealing to feed our children, or so enraged that we break windows and burn buildings. We must acknowledge our fortune. We must understand the hopelessness that lays the groundwork for antisocial or even criminal behavior. Do we have concern for the person experiencing pain or rage, or do we judge them without understanding the source of their anguish? Can we be compassionate even in the midst of their destructive acts? A Bodhisattva would. Seventh, realize that wrongdoing comes from the 5 desires, and always be mindful of the triple robe, the Dharma instruments, and be willing to leave home and uphold the way. This realization is in many ways a summary of the others, a reminder that the 5 wants in their extreme, food, sleep, sex, money, fame, cause us to turn away from a loving, compassionate life. Our greed and self-involvement get in the way of our goodness, our passion for good. It is there, this Buddha nature, if we tamp down those desires and be satisfied with only what is necessary. And when we do that, we are that Mahayana Bodhisattva, a person who wisely sees the needs of others and finds ways to relieve their pain. This then brings us to the last, the 8th realization, that we are to initiate the Mahayana mind to universally help all beings. Initiate the Mahayana mind. During the study of the 8 realizations of a Bodhisattva Sutra, we have been encouraged to let go of desires and focus on the Buddha's teachings of loving kindness and compassion. If we let go of greed and hatred, if we replace ignorance with the truth of the Dharma, then our never-ending cycle of birth and death will come to an end, and we will be in tip-top shape to help others and their cycle of suffering too. So now, dear patient friends, fellow disciples, monastic, lay, let us go back to the beginning of this time together, remembering the opening verse. For all disciples of the Buddha, each morning and night, recite with a sincere mind these 8 realizations of a Bodhisattva. Perhaps now sit in a meditative manner, close your eyes, or focus on the screen before you, listening deeply to the English chanting of the 8 realizations of Great Being Sutra as sung at Blue Cliff Monastery in Pine Bush, New York.
Of all unwholesome actions.
Oop.
And never feels fulfilled. This brings about unwholesome activity. Bodhisattvas, on the other hand, know the value of having few desires. They live simply and peacefully, so they can devote themselves to practicing the way. They regard the realization of perfect understanding to be their only career. Only career. The fourth realization is the awareness that indolence is an obstacle to practice. You must practice diligently to transform unwholesome mental states that bind you. And you must conquer the four kinds of Mara in order to free yourself from the prisons of the five aggregates and the three worlds. Three worlds. The fifth realization is the awareness that ignorance is the cause of the endless round of birth and death. Bodhisattvas always listen to and learn from others, so their understanding and skillful means can develop, and so they can teach living beings and bring them great joy. Great joy. Great joy. Great joy. The sixth realization is the awareness that poverty creates hatred and anger, which creates a vicious cycle of negative thoughts and actions. When practicing generosity, Bodhisattvas consider everyone, friends and enemies alike, to be equal.
Okay, I think we're experiencing a little bit of technical difficulty. I think the music is so touching that I think I just want to say that it is a proof that the Buddha's teaching has no language barrier, right? And it really reminds us of the beautiful American folk song. So okay, now we're resuming.
Maybe.
Is a sensual desire. Money, sex, fame, overeating, and oversleeping lead to problems. Although you are in the world, try not to be caught in worldly matters.
Dhammakaya boat to the shore of Nirvana and have been returned to the ordinary world, free of the 5 sensual desires, their minds and hearts directed toward the noble way. Using these 8 realizations, they helped all beings recognize the suffering in the world. If the disciples of the Buddha recite and meditate on these 8 realizations, it will put an end to countless misunderstandings and difficulties and progress toward enlightenment, leaving behind the world of birth and death, dwelling forever in peace.
Okay.
Do we still have one slide? I believe there's still one slide. Yeah, can we go back to the presentation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it will work.
Let me see here. I think it's an important slide. Let me show that from my computer. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
I think you can continue. This is the last
Okay.
slide.
All right. It's like, can you hear me now? I hope you enjoyed, even with our technical difficulties, which I think all of us are experiencing these days of COVID in a very busy cyber world. I have to tell you that each time I listen to this, and I have it on my phone, my iPad, and my computer, I tear up and I feel the pain and I feel the hope. And I hope that this sutra and this chanting will bring relief and realization to you. Because we now realize that everything changes. And perhaps I'm not in control of the change, but I am in control of how I experience change. And my responsibility to change the conditions of those who are sick, who are afraid, who are experiencing racial violence, who are the recipient of the many unnecessary disparities and indignities in our society. We can reach out. We can meet the needs with equanimity and loving kindness and compassion, bringing, as the 8th realization says, great joy. The Buddha shows the way to all of us bodhisattvas and bodhisattvas in training. This is the spirit and practice of humanistic Buddhism, being human, caring for all humans. Venerable Master Xing Yun speaks of the value of the practice when he says, faith in humanistic Buddhism shall lead to the purification of body and mind. With an open mind, you shall transcend all differences between self and others. You will free yourself from attachment, delusion, and suffering. Additionally, you shall feel the joy of Chan and Dharma. These are all benefits that can be attained through the practice of humanistic Buddhism. The practice of humanistic Buddhism is a gift to each of us. All we have to do is unwrap it. Be safe, be well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Ina, for your inspiring talk and the music as well. As we can see, the Buddha's teaching is a proof that the Buddha's teaching can break the barrier of languages. And also we just saw the first Dharma seal, which is impermanence. As we can see, the internet is not permanent. So, I hope the audience has gained a greater understanding of the Buddha's teaching, the 8 realization of Bodhisattva Sutra, and I hope the audience can use them to guide their daily lives and action. So it's been an honor to have this opportunity to listen to you speak. As for now, I think we can enter the Q&A section. Again, I encourage everyone to type their question in the Q&A area in Zoom or the YouTube chat box, which is here. Yes. So, or here, sorry, here. Yes. So I think the questions are pouring in, and then I'll pass them along to you, Ina, one by one. Okay. So the first question is, this is a very direct question. As a Westerner, what do you think the biggest challenge is in engaging humanistic Buddhism, and in the process for you in engaging humanistic Buddhism? Are there anything that is surprising to you?
No, nothing surprising. What I want to share something about the words humanistic Buddhism. They go way back. In fact, that's what the Buddha was talking about. That as people began to use the word humanistic Buddhism in the East, they were saying Buddhism is more than ritual. It is daily practice. It is practicing in the world. Coming from a Christian background, I think of Catholic Charities, Lutheran Social Services, etc. That we in the West are used to there being a social service component to religion. So it's easy for the Westerners to grasp the purpose of humanistic Buddhism. A lot of times in classes, what they will do is say, why do you say humanistic Buddhism? Isn't it just Buddhism? And of course I smile and say, yes. But what we're trying to do is remind ourselves that we need to be out in the world and in the community. We can't be cloistered, whether it's in a monastery or on a large church campus where everything is there for people and they don't interact in the world. So I don't see it as a problem for Westerners. Where I see a challenge is for Buddhist communities in the West to find better ways of working with one another, because we're such a diverse society that, and as people are looking for a spiritual home, maybe our temple home is the right place for you, but not the right place for me because of my cultural background or my interests. So the challenge, I think, is less for the Westerner and more for the Buddhist community to find ways of working together so that they help everyone find their spiritual home.
Thank you so much for your elaboration. Thank you, Ina. As for the second question, it says, life is full of suffering. I think we just saw that from the slide. It seems to be a rather negative view. What would you say to this person if someone asked this question?
Well, I would probably say to them the way when I'm working with kids, you know, who come to the temple, like a school group or a church group. And I say that the Buddha taught 4 things. He says, life is a pain, we create it, we don't have to, here's how not to. I seldom use the word suffering. I use the word discontentment or disillusionment. And that's because we don't understand the world as it is and how things change. So I find a different word. Whenever you take a concept or from one language to another, there's always something that gets lost in the translation. And the word for suffering for us sounds like a horrible pain that we're, that we need to go to the hospital for immediately. That if you use the word discontent, then people understand content. Disillusionment, they understand clarity. It's hard to find the antonym for suffering to explain to people. So I think we should probably explain it more instead of just trying to use the word. It's almost like sometimes we fall into Buddha talk of Sanskrit and Pali words instead of really understanding and explaining what they mean. So forget the word suffering, say pain in the neck, pain, disillusionment, discontent, angst. That'll work, and that will help people see that they're in control of it.
Thank you so much, Aina. I think this is how I feel when I'm reading the Chinese Sutra. I know every single character, but I have no idea what it says. So let's move on to the next question on the chat box. It says here from Li Sanping. It says, can you repeat the 4 maras that were mentioned in the 5 desires, and also excellent lecture and heavenly chanting?
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's the chanting. I wish I could sing like that. All right, I knew that somebody would ask about those 4 maras, so I pulled it up on my computer because I didn't make my little notes. So I will read to you here and then explain it. It says, as Buddhism developed, it created a theory of 4 kinds of Mara. And when you think of Mara, if you come from a Judeo-Christian background or Islamic background, we often talk about devil. And devil are those evil thoughts on one shoulder, sort of like Buddha's on one shoulder and Mara's on the other. So you think of the personification of unwholesomeness is another way of explaining Mara. So there's the Mara of our mental and physical existence that gets us in a heap of trouble. Our compulsions, all of those desires. Our worry about death, that it's going to happen, and we don't want it to happen, instead of learning how to accept it. And the Mara that it says here that is born out of God, and that's not. I'm trying to think of how I usually explain that. It's it's basically the Mara. Basically the attributes of us that are from unwholesome thoughts, desires. I can't think of the word. Things that enticements. I can't think of the word. That allow us to be greedy, hate others, and have a delusion about what is real. So just think of Mara as unskillful thoughts, feelings, and actions, and you'll be in good shape, even though my definition is off the mark.
Thank you for your explanation, Aina, and thank you, Li Sanping, for your question. So next question, you mentioned that in the 4th realization, laziness leads to downfall. But in America, it seems that we are living in a country of overachievement and workaholism. So are we working at the right thing, or are we lazy, or are we working at the right things?
Okay, we're probably working our tails off, as we would say, but for the wrong things. The laziness here is not about whether or not you put in a 40-hour week or a 50-hour week. It's the diligence toward those attributes of a Bodhisattva that I talked about earlier. that really have their foundation in kindness and compassion for others. That are we giving? Do we understand what is necessary, or do we just give what makes us feel good? Are we diligent in the practice of the study and then the practice of Buddhism? It doesn't have to do with the workaday world. It has to do with how we train our mind, how we find room in this 50-hour week to think of others instead of self. So it's the laziness of lack of attention to our mind, and how, like for instance, if we walk by a homeless person on the street, what are our thoughts? Are we lazy in thinking about that person? Oh, that person's probably on drugs, and walk on. Do we make a judgment, or do we take time to understand the suffering of that person and find a way through our time, treasure, and talent to ease the suffering of that fellow being?
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I think this segues to the next question. It says here, I think in the presentation, it was mentioned that reading a sutra will help us to see the other point of view. What if someone is not a Buddhist? What would be your advice?
Oh, I say read it anyhow. I mean, in our Buddha Book Buddy classes or groups, I wouldn't call them classes. Usually they're half Buddhist practitioners. I'm going to have too many halves here. So a percentage of Buddhist practitioners, a percentage of other religion practitioners, usually Christian, some who are unchurched or untempled, and everyone in reading the sutra begins to see the truth in it, and they can see the truth of their own religious practice in that sutra. The key is to get beyond, like you were saying, reading the Chinese words and not having a clue. That's where the Venerable Master and, there isn't that much in English. So a lot of times I will go to Thich Nhat Hanh's interpretations, where they put it in real life words. This is what this means. It's like, for instance, when you're studying the Sumati Sutra, and the first question that Sumati asks is basically, how can I be pretty, have a beautiful appearance? The Buddha doesn't talk about your dress and your makeup. He talks about your mind and your heart. So when you read that, you make connections to your own faith tradition, or just the reality of being a kind, gentle person. And that's the beauty. So it's easy to do. It just takes a little bit of effort and sort of set the Sanskrit aside.
I think Aina, I agree with what you say. Being able to read the sutra in English would be easier than reading in Sanskrit. So
some of the venerables that I've talked to said, sometimes they'll read Chinese or the Sanskrit or whatever, and then also read the English, because the truth is always in the middle. You read here, and I remember one time we were having a class, and Venerable Chifan came up to the class, and someone asked her a question. She said, and with that, she ran out, went downstairs, came up with the Chinese translation so that she could look at the Chinese and the English and then make sense for us to understand. So the truth is in the middle of blending the knowledge on both sides, I think.
Thank you so much. So here's another question about America. So in America, it seems like everything is bigger and more is always good. So for an average American, you know, we just mentioned in the presentation that we should try to lessen our greed and desire. How do we teach an average American who thinks more is good, bigger is good?
If I knew how to do that, the science of industry would be out for my skin because I would be saying you don't need that much. But kidding aside, part of what I try to do is, well, I'll give you an example of something that happened recently. I was trying to, my dog knocked over a cup of coffee. I'm trying to clean up the coffee. Long story short, I ended up knocking over a favored piece of hand-thrown pottery. And I was telling a friend, I said, oh, Nellie did this and that happened, etc. And she says, oh no. And I said, you know what? It was a thing. And the memory of that thing is still here. I don't need the things. And I think sometimes as we get older, we realize that things are not as important, that relationship is important. And maybe that's what we need to teach our children more, and we need to practice it more. Our country has been built on the industrial age. You know, we're proud of I come from Chicago, city of the big shoulders, you know. And that's good in a way, because I have been to Europe, I have been to Asia, and I want to tell you there's a lot of greed in those countries and those continents too. It looks different. So we all need to own how we lead our lives and what is really a necessity. And I think that cuts across cultures. We are just more brazen about it, shamefully so, I will admit.
Okay, thank you for that perspective, Aina. So speaking about looking different, here's a question. So these days it seems that we're living in a torn nation. Each side says the other side is wrong. So what is right? What is wrong? You know, will reading more Sutra help us to answer that question, or is there a right answer to that question at all?
I think studying, the reason why I chose the 8 Realization Sutra tonight is that I feel that it speaks to what is happening in our country, especially now. And I know it's not just our country, but this is where I live and this is where I feel the greatest responsibility. That the reason why I spent the time that I did talking about poverty, which I think is that the 5th or 6th, I can't remember which of the realizations, that poverty is something that so easily we put fault to. I have heard people say, well, those people, it's always those people, just need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. What if they have no shoes? What if they have no shoes? And how many pairs of shoes do I have in my closet? And I mean that structurally, figuratively, as well as literally. That we tend to look at others as less than. And I see that in our politics now. I'm worried for our country. In our country or in our community, one person's sign was stolen from their yard, and it was not the side that I'm on politically. And I thought that was horrible. They had a right for that sign to be out there. So what I did then was was take up the sign of a neighbor who's not in town right now, who's on the political side that I'm on, because I wanted to protect both of their houses. Because people are becoming violent, and there is an enticement toward violence that is going to destroy good people, and it's going to cause lives to be lost. And we need to, I think each of us needs to watch our words, that we can disagree with the other side. We can see the other side as wrong or immoral or whatever. But just like this sutra says, have compassion for friend and foe. That's hard to do. It's hard to accept that maybe we don't have it all right. But even if we are correct, it doesn't mean we are right if we find fault with another human being.
Thank you so much, Aina. I think compassion is what we need in this country right now, and we should remind ourselves every day that we need to live with compassion. So moving on to the next question. You talk about Mara, desire, and then there's also a concept of compassion or truism. So all these also, there are similar philosophies in other faiths, right? Such as Christianity, as you mentioned. Are there any distinct difference or in methodology in Buddhism that makes it so distinct from other religions, in your view?
In my view, no. The practice might be different. The belief of a God might be different. But what does God say? But to be compassionate. The difference in Buddhism is that the Buddha tells us, it's up to you. It's up to the decisions that you make. We call it karma. Sometimes what I will tell people when they ask, why do we pray to the Buddha? And I say, look, praying to the Buddha is not going to get your kid into Harvard. Praying to the Buddha is to thank him for the gift of the Dharma and hope that we will be able to use it and make wise decisions. Now, look at Christianity. You can pray to God, ask God to get your kid into Harvard. And what the scriptures say is God helps them who helps themselves. So in many ways, there's much more similarity. And one of the Venerable Master's best friends was either a cardinal or a bishop in Taiwan. They were bosom buddies, and the Dalai Lama and I've lost his name, in South Africa, Desmond Tutu, head of the Anglican Church there. Good friends. They had much more in common than they did in difference, because they led their lives teaching loving kindness, caring for the poor, not judging others by a false standard. So I don't see a whole lot of difference. One of the things that I'm really missing now that we're in COVID life is a group of seminary students that I usually have a couple tours and discussions with a couple times a year from a local seminary. And when we talk about heaven and hell and God and Buddha and all of that, in the beginning, we're looking at the differences. And at the end of the 2 hours or so that we're together, everybody leaves feeling the sameness.
Great, thank you so much for your answer, Aina. I don't remember that I had a noble goal of praying to get into Harvard, but I do remember having prayed to pass my Chinese exam for the next. So next question. There are a lot of misunderstanding, amongst Westerner in Buddhism. And what do you think that you may have sort of answered? What do you think that makes it more accessible for Westerner to learn Buddhism?
Okay, here's what I think happens with Westerners in Buddhism in the beginning. They come to, and this has been the experience at our temple. People come looking for comfort. They're in a sea of suffering. Often young men come in talking about issues with anger, and they understand that Buddhism is peaceful. So they're searching for something. What I try to do in teaching Buddhism is say, let's get beyond the exotic stuff, the robes, the incense, all of that. That's part of practice. But to practice Buddhism is hard work. It's supposed to be hard work. We're supposed to challenge ourselves. Out of that challenge comes a joy. There are actually a lot of Buddhist groups, even here in Orlando. They often start out and get stuck in mindfulness. That we in Buddhism, maybe, I'm not sure about this, maybe we're not communicating well enough the importance of the Mahayana path, the path of service, of compassion to and loving kindness and service to others. I think also if we're part of a Chinese Buddhist community, I don't know about usually there are Chinese and Vietnamese Buddhist communities in most of our communities. I don't know how much the Chinese and Buddhist communities really understand how Westerners think about Buddhism. And that in some ways they have a deeper understanding than you might think. In the classes that I do, we go deep dish pretty fast, but not in learning complex words or such, but rather what is the essence of, what does it mean to be that Bodhisattva? The two things that I really like to use as the basis of my teaching are this sutra and the 6 paramitas. That tells you what you need to know in order to lead a noble life. The Noble Eightfold Path, it's not the stuff on the path that's noble. It's that we become noble by following that path. And that brings up all kinds of interesting discussions about if somebody gets murdered on 3rd Street and I live on 1st Street, how am I responsible for that? And I push people to see the connectedness, the joint responsibility. And Westerners get it. They get it or they go, I don't know. But they appreciate the opportunity to think deeply.
Great, thank you so much. I think we have time for one more question. So the last question here is that you mentioned a book, or is it a letter, that is called Dear White People, bracket, including myself, by Tenko Rough Osho. So this is an interesting topic. it talks about breaking comfort bubble and walls. Do you think that this kind of thing can help us to build strength? Do you think the difference and by breaking up the comfort bubble and walls actually help us to build strength, but not more divisiveness?
Absolutely, and this is the current issue of Buddha Dharma. Looks like yo, and this is the article. It's called "No One Wakes Up Until We All Wake Up." And that's the answer right there. By breaking down the walls, by getting out of our comfort zone, we learn about one another, and therefore we learn their strengths, their value, their needs, because there's strength also in people of poverty. We don't always need to think that we're the ones serving them. In fact, one of the stories, and forgive me, I can't think of the name of the disciple of the Buddha right now, who asked of a poor woman who had nothing but dirty water left. And he asked her to give it to him. And he drank it, fetid water from rice or whatever. That he said, in a way, he's saying to her, you are of value and you have gifts to give. Think how that made her feel. That if we get out of our bubble and if we see ourselves as one with one another, sometimes it's uncomfortable. There are things that I've done at a Chinese temple that have been wrong. I've used the wrong broom in the main shrine and stuff, But if we risk doing things and meeting one another and sharing with one another, think of how beautiful life becomes. But it only becomes beautiful because we accept that sorrow starts the process. Sorrow starts the process. Suffering starts the process. We don't learn from our successes. We learn from our failures. So we need not be afraid of what we call suffering or making mistakes, whether it's a social faux pas or whatever. Do it. Be out there with people. Yes, it will shatter. We shatter walls and we make mistakes, but that's how we learn. And that's what, what's her name? Tenku Roof is her name. That's what she says in this. This is just a 2-page article, and you might be able to go onto Buddha Dharma and just pull up the article. A lot of times they will put some of the articles online. The author is Tenku, Tenku, last name Ruff, Ruff. She's an American, she's white bread like me. And she really holds, like I said, she holds our white feet to the fire, which is good. They need to be there.
Okay, thank you so much again, Ina, for joining us and speaking to us today. I hope all the audience will learn how to live with compassion, break your bubbles, wake up, and see others' view.
Yes.
And again, we appreciate Ina's time and the effort in answering these questions, and also thankful for the audience for the participation. And now I would like to invite President of BLA Boston Chapter again, Cortland, for a closing remark. Please, President Cortland.
Oh, there he is. Hi.
Hi. Thank you, Ina. This is really an inspiring and exciting talk. We, at least, I'm sure not just me, we all have learned a lot from this talk, and we have obtained a better understanding in contemplating the 8th realization of Bodhisattva Sutra on our daily lives. And of course, we have learned that only by being able to seeing things from another's point of view, we can then be harmony between ourselves and others. we are definitely looking forward to have another talk by Ina in the near future. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, I have so many screens. Oh, so thank you, President Ko Liang. Before we adjourn, I'd like to announce the detail of our next Dharma talk. Can we share the poster? Okay, great. The next Mandarin public talk is on October 25th, 2020 at 8 p.m. So as I'm practicing my Mandarin, the topic will be Master Xingyun Points to Wisdom, Xingyun Da Shi Dian Zhi Wei. And with that, it wraps up our event. Thank you for making your time in your busy schedule to join us. It's been our pleasure to host this event, and we hope you and your family are staying healthy and safe. See you next time.
Thank you.